Hello everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. I'm not 100% sure I positioned this correctly, but I guess we'll find out. I see we've got lots of people in the chat today. Let's see, we've got Quindy, of course, our moderator, Nomad Zeke, Clavicus, Albivazin, The Real POTUS 98, Valander, Julia Trent, T. Pugmire, Kiriniko, F. Francis, who's kindly gifting a sub to somebody in thanks for a sub that they got gifted. It looks like everyone can hear me. Oops, now I just moved my other camera, so we'll find out if that's in the right place in a minute. So what's been going on? I mean, it's a very boring time Reaper-wise, right? Just kidding. It's, I assume that some people are here for the Kickstarter, or out of Kickstarter interest. Oh, we've got a new name in the chat. Gloom and a Fan, 1999. I'm sure, Glum and a Fan, 1999. I'm sure I'm saying your name wrong, but that is me. I apologize for that. So I am going to be talking about a bit of Kickstarter stuff, but if you hear, because you heard there are going to be afternoon Kickstarter updates, that's actually going to start at, I want to say 5, because it's 5 my time. It's going to be 4 Reaper time. 4 p.m. Reaper time. So I'm going to ask Quindy and anyone else in the chat who's still there then, I know time for a bull, to poke me, 5 or 10 minutes before 5 so that I'll finish up what I'm doing so that we can promptly get you over to what you're probably here for, which is Kickstarter information. Lord Golder, another new viewer. Oh no, he's saying the new viewer is his girlfriend Flavia, who's watching for the first time. Well, thank you, Flavia and Lord Golder, for showing up. 4 p.m. Central, Quindy's confirming that the afternoon Kickstarter chat will start then, which that's sort of Reaper time, so we try to list times in Reaper time. I live in Eastern, and I'm sure that you all live in various different time zones. Time zones are one of those things that just break my brain. I have trouble calculating it. I'm glad we have Google now, so I can just kind of look it up. But I do always get confused with Reaper stuff because it's just an hour difference, and then I'll be like, no, this is starting early or late, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I was a little bit, it looks like Anne didn't paint today. Is that correct, Quindy? I went looking through the shows, and it looked like Reaper Errant from last Friday, which is the Hyrax 333. Reaper Errant is a show where some of the artists, so some of those fine sculptors whose work you've been enjoying in Kickstarter, Anne's flight got delayed. Okay, that makes sense. So we play in a Dungeons and Dragons game hosted by Nightheart Gaming. So if you enjoy watching people play Dungeons and Dragons and people teasing other people about their sculpts killing us, you might want to check out that. But so I'm a little concerned about being the first thing since Friday, because I know you're all hungry for Kickstarter information and I only have so much. So I will try to share a little bit in the beginning and then probably take a break and share some later. But for those who aren't interested in Kickstarter, or don't want it to take over their lives until closer till the end, I also want to do something else, so that we're trying to do a little something for everyone, which probably means I'll make no one happy, but there we go. Kiriniko says it's 8 p.m. there. That's right, you're in Scotland, I believe, right? The stream is just in time for my evening painting session. Daka Flocka Flame is here. Yes, Bone 6, if you want to know more about the Kickstarter. And actually, if you are someone who is, if this is your first Reaper Kickstarter, or it might even be your first Kickstarter in general, the Reaper Kickstarters are the kind of ones that bring people in that have never participated in Kickstarter before. I'm a super backer, so clearly I know all about Kickstarter. So just be here, I'm not a Reaper employee, so I'm not answering any questions definitively. I paint for them like on a contract basis. I paint some of the models that go up in the web store, but I've been in every one of the Bones Kickstarter since the first one. I've been, working, doing this contract stuff for Reaper for longer than that. So I will do my best to answer questions. Just remember, they're not definitive. And as a painter, I'm kind of last in the knowledge line. So I only have limited information to give out about what model is this, or I don't know what scale things are. I can't answer those kinds of questions. But if you have general questions about Kickstarter, general questions about how Reaper Kickstarters work, feel free to toss those in the chat. No Time for Bull is asking, I don't know if he's asking me specifically. I think everyone in the chat should feel welcome to answer this. How much of your Bones 5 minis have you painted? And I would say pretty much what you've seen me paint on stream mostly. Or other things that I've done for Reaper, like the Goblin's Quick Paint Kit. So I painted these guys because Ron asked me to paint these guys. So my problem is that mostly I'm painting things that other people I work for are also asking me to paint new stuff that is coming out for them. So it's mostly Dark Sword miniatures. So I very rarely get to go back and paint things that have already come out, other than if I'm like, I might be testing color schemes, or sometimes I just need to unwind and I'll paint something. So I do occasionally paint on kind of like my own recognizance. But not as much as I would like. It kind of turned into, and I'm told this phrase isn't super common in America, but I'm from Canada, and I'm sure that Nico's going to know what I'm talking about. We call it a busman's holiday, and that's doing the thing you do for a job for fun. So I like painting miniatures, but it is my job, so I'm more likely to sit down and paint a 2D picture or paint on my iPad or something when I'm just relaxing. And we haven't played in person for a while, so there hasn't been any pressure to paint for our game. And even then, I kind of would only paint things I knew we could kill, so we didn't have a lot of miniatures. I'm kidding. Julia Trent said, I did not know about Reaper in time for the first Kickstarter, though I did catch the 5.5, so I haven't gotten mine yet. And by first Kickstarter, Julia Trent actually means Kickstarter 5. So this one that's happening right now is the 6th time that Reaper has done this, and it's different every time. So I see a lot of people in the chat and in the comments of things complaining that this is different and that, and they're different every time. I mean, the world has changed. Even if nothing else had changed, the world has changed. There are people saying, well, I don't need as many miniatures because I'm not playing in person. There's all kinds of stuff happening. And just things change over time. The first Reaper Kickstarter, it was like nothing very, like the beginning part was not very exciting. And then at the end, it blew up. And then people knew about it. So the second one was kind of a bit different. It was like it blew up at first and then had the doldrums in the middle. And then most Kickstarters go crazy in the last 48 hours because you can click a thing where you say, notify me about this later. And Kickstarter will send you a note that says it's the last 48 hours if you want in with this. And I think they'll actually send you a couple of those, because I've been getting ones now for Kickstarters when it's like the last 8 hours. They'll be like, okay, it's your last chance if you want to get in on this. Nico is outdoing Time for Bull, who has opened the box, and myself by painting 2 of the dragons in the last 5 weeks and feels so productive. That is very productive. So I'm going to switch over to the other view and show you stuff while I'm talking. There we go. So I will show you some of these guys, which you have seen before, but I do have some things that you haven't seen before. Zoom in a little. So these are in the core set, and it's the party that fits together. In fact, why don't I fit them together first, and then we'll show them individually. Zoom back out. So if you've seen these in the Kickstarter, it might not be obvious that their base is key together, which is very fun. So you can display them as a group or individually. And if you've been here previously, you may have heard some stories about how there was an issue with the mace and the issue has reasserted itself. Now, let me just say right now, this is not the material that the Kickstarter will be in. These are 3D prints, so it's a resin, it's more brittle. I have copies of the ones that people are getting as promos, and that will probably be the same style as will be in the Kickstarter. So don't be afraid that the material that Reaper makes this in for people to buy is going to have the same problem. This is because of 3D prints and resin miniatures in general are more brittle. And also I have a glue curse. So, Real POTUS 98, what are you wondering? What the camera is? Or the overhead camera is an IPVO document camera. So you're looking straight down. That's why they're like that. If I want you to see them from the front, I have to hold them sideways. And that's what I think most, if not all of the Reaper people are using. Miniatures Den and Crafty Creative probably have their own setups because they were streaming before they started doing Reaper streams. So they will have a slightly different setup. So this is the wizard. And when Ron sent these to me, he asked if I could paint them with with some OSL. So that became one of the challenges for this. If you've been following along my blog, so if you see that website up at the top of the page, I write articles about painting. So if you're interested in what colors did I use on this cape, well, okay, this guy isn't up yet. Let's look at this one because this is the most recent one that I posted. So if you're interested in like the exact colors I used on the armor or just some reflections on the process I had painting this miniature, that is my most recent article. I did the fighter before that, the thief, and then kind of an overview article. And I write articles about painting miniatures all the time. This is not like a Kickstarter or specific thing. And I write about the figures I paint for other companies. I write kind of general. There's an emotional component to painting as well. I talk about that sometimes. So it's a mix of like how to and here's colors I used and kind of how do we deal with the psychological component sometimes. Real POTUS 98 wants to buy a Pivo camera so the minis look as good as mine. I sometimes get distressed with this camera. I think the cameras that people are using that are like really high quality are like Canons and stuff like that, where it's more of a camera and then you have like a rig that holds it so it's looking face down. I think, so Aaron Lovejoy does an airbrushing show for Reaper some Fridays. So this is the one show that is like a weird schedule. So it's not a Reaper Errant Friday, and it's also when Aaron has time. But every now and then there will be, and I'm blanking on the name of his show currently. Maybe Quindy knows. And he runs with a really fancy camera because he also has a Patreon where he does painting classes and stuff like that. So I hope to get something like that sometime. House of Vex. Thank you, Quindy. I should have thought of that because the Reaper airbrush is called Vex. So I do have her detached little mace, and I was trying to glue it back on, and I just am so cursed about glue. I'm debating whether to just leave it detached until I get to Reaper, because chances are it would just fall off again. Something on my desk knocked against it before I put it away after the last show is what happened, because of course it did. Not that I thought that glue join was going to stay very well anyway. So that I think I showed the back of the wizard. So he'll be the next article. That'll come up in a couple of days. And then I'm going to talk about the source lighting. And the challenge with these is that they needed to look good on their own as well as looking good in a group with the source lighting. And some of the stuff you would do for source lighting, for example, like he's behind this light. So there is no light falling on his face. If I assumed that the source light was the only light in the scene, you would barely be able to see his face or the front of his clothing. So I kind of had to walk a middle ground between working out a source light effect. I'm not sure if it still looks a little dark. My screen, it's not that great. But so if it still looks a little dark, let me know and I'll bump it up again. I had to walk a middle path between making them look good on their own and making the source light look really effective. So my last article is going to be talking about things you would do to make source lighting more effective than what I've done here. Where it's kind of an accent, not the main thing. I mean, there's a bit of it here. You can see it's cool on this side, which is shadowed for her. And then if you flip her the other way, there's a lot more warm colors on this side, and it's lighter in value. So this is the thief, and that's the whole group. These miniatures have been going out in Reaper orders. They also were in the swag bags at Adepticon. And I finally started this guy, who is the Goblin. Now, his base doesn't key in. You can see he's got a round base. But he is also one of the promotional figures. Now, the difference between this Goblin and the other ones I just showed you is this is the production material. So this is the same material that you guys are getting, which is Bones Black. If you were in like the first Bones, first one or two, the white figures that were more rubbery, like this is an original sort of 4 scale. So this was super durable, but there were places where it wouldn't hold the detail as well, and sometimes the weapons, the thin weapons like that, would look a little bendy. Bones Black doesn't have that problem. You can see this is much stiffer, and I'm not going to pull on her mace much more. Otherwise, I could do the same thing that happened. You know, you can pull on a little. It's still sturdy. You know, I have no fear of doing this even with painted ones, but it's a little more, that's kind of your switch off. If you want more detail and you don't want bendy weapons, his weapon is supposed to look like that. It's not bent. Then you have slightly less durability. So right now they are just using, oh, I haven't cleaned this one up because this was, I took this straight out of the package. I cleaned him up because I painted him. But this is, so when they're in the mold, it's kind of like an Easter bunny where it's two halves, and there are channels for excess mold material or whatever to get in and get out when they shoot the plastic through. So that's just a little nub. I mean, it's super easy to clean up. I'll even get my scalpel and do that. Note that I am not advocating for anyone to use scalpels. I'm just doing what I do. So that little white mark is just a place where, you know, a bit of the mold was still showing. You pare it off like you would take off a carrot skin or a similar vegetable. And you can do the same thing with mold lines. I mean, the mold lines are pretty faint, so you can also ignore them if you want. There's like a little bit on her hair. Now, I'm kind of a fanatic about mold lines. And even these are hard enough to scrape, which I would normally do with more of an X-Acto type blade. So you see a little dot there, but that's just a visual artifact of the edge. Let me get, no, white's not gonna work. Get kind of middle ground color of paint, and I'll paint it over that so you can see that that sort of thing in plastic is just, once you clean it off, it's just a visual thing. So that's what it looks like before. For a minute I thought, did I get water before I sat down? And happily I did. So I'm just going to get a little bit of green ochre. Zoom in even. And paint it over that, and then I'll show you again when it dries. And that smooths it out. Valander the Red, would you suggest a file or an X-Acto for dealing with Bones black mold lines? I would probably use an X-Acto, or I actually like the scalpel better because the blade doesn't dull out as quick for Bones black. For Bones USA, I use a bit of both. Now, you can use files on this, the secret, and you can use files even on this original stuff that people said you couldn't use files on. But there is a little bit of a trick to it. There's also these things which are called, I want to say, sanding needles. So let's zoom out. And they come in a few different strengths. So this is like a piece of plastic that has a very fine grit sandpaper or something glued onto it. Hey, Ultra Squid. Hi, Bruce. Bryce, why did I say Bruce? Bryce asked, tell me all your secrets. Those minis were painted so well, rocking color choices. I put all the secrets on my blog. I didn't hide anything. Some of the color choices were, I ran out of colors. What do I do? So, I don't know if you're even going to be able to see. If I can find a place where you can see more lines. Let's try another guy. Let's see if the wizard has something on his cloak. Alas, no. There we go. She's got a little bit on her leg, but I mean, as much as I've improved my camera setup a little, it's probably still going to be hard to see. I'm trying to get it to focus a little. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it so you can see the mold line, but you can see what I do about the mold line. So you can get the sanding needle, or this is a diamond file. You don't want to use those crisscross style files. And what I do is I just file in one direction. So when I'm doing metal, I'm like, all over it. But for this plastic stuff, I just use one direction, and I'm doing it, like you can see I'm not really causing damage to my fingernail. I like to say you could do this on a baby, and they wouldn't get upset, which people find a creepy way to put it. But that's the kind of light pressure that I'm talking about. And we can do that to Mr. Original Bones here too. So you will sometimes, especially with these more original bones, you'll get what I call squigglies or gribblies. So they're like little bits that kind of hang off. Then you take the file and go even softer in the opposite direction just to get those to come off. So this is a sanding stick. I do not, Squadron maybe? Maybe is the company that puts it out. I cannot remember, but if you search for sanding needles, on Amazon or look in your hobby store. I used to get these at Hobbytown. I haven't been to Hobbytown in a while, but my guess is they would still have them. They may have it like in the model section or something, not the miniature section. And it's a very similar thing. Just these are going to wear out. Eventually the sand is going to come off, where a diamond file is going to last a long time. This is actually, so I did recently replace my diamond files. It had been 15 or 18 years or something. So, but I was amazed at, I could feel how run down my old ones are. But if you have old ones, that might work even better with bones. Well, bones black or bones original. And then if you're using a knife, you don't want to scrape. You want to kind of catch the mold line and shave it off. Although let's remember, I am not recommending people use knives. I'm showing you what I do. Particularly if you are a young person, check with whoever is in charge of you not killing yourself before you do this. So that is what I did on this guy. And he didn't, there are a couple of places where it's not perfect, the cleaning job. But I got it pretty good. I'm trying to do this fast for Ron. Like, you can see a place there where it doesn't look great. But that's like where did the thief go that I was painting over? It's like that once I paint over it. Okay, you can see that one a little bit, but I bet I can clean that up better. And definitely I found that in metal. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is, so metal miniatures, and I'm not going to have one with me that has the problem. I have a metal miniature, but I don't want to show that one to you. If you've ever had ones with like big, thick cloaks, like even probably bigger than this, you'll get pitting, like little indentations. They're not like dramatic, but they're there. And it's most likely to happen with the big Bobby Jackson chunk of metal miniatures, with the thick robes and the giant cloaks, because they're so big that the metal is starting to cool by the time it hits the edge of the mold. So, but the nice thing is that it's not happening on like faces and filigree and stuff like that. But it will happen on these areas of cloth that you want to have nice and smooth. This is kind of my secret weapon for that. Well, mine and a lot of other painters. Or when you have other kind of surface issues. So we will paint this over things. This bottle is getting very low, which I should probably replace it, to smooth down the surface. And honestly, I had to do this more with metal miniatures than I have to do with plastic miniatures, but it is a way to fix like this little problem that you can maybe kind of see that it's not 100% smooth. So you just get the stuff. Now the sort of annoying thing about this is I'm going to paint this over. And it's clear, so you're not going to be able to see that it did anything. And it probably is going to take more than one coat. But what's going to happen is it's going to go into any microscopic crevices or problems or whatever. If I have mold lines that I've missed some time, like I'm not afraid to, particularly on the metal miniatures, I do it less with plastic miniatures. But if I get to this stage and I start painting, like, I hadn't started the shield yet, and I put the first coat of paint on, and I know there's a mold line. I'm not afraid to get out my file or knife or whatever and fix that mold line before I continue. If it's metal miniature, I'll just use brush on primer to fix the primer. But that stuff will also work. You can kind of, I don't have a divot, but what can we pretend is a divot? Let's pretend the inside of the P is a divot. So I would get a brush, and maybe even a smaller one than this, and I'd just touch it to where the little hole is. Let the stuff dry. I'd probably do it again. I'm going to give this another coat. Apparently I should do a whole episode that's about prep, because that's not what I was intending to do today. But if people want, next week I could talk some about Bones 5 stuff, and then just talk about how do you deal with some of the unique eccentricities of Bones and other miniatures. So that's going to take a second to dry, so I'm going to leave it. But while we're here, these are the consumer versions of these figures that I was talking about that, as far as I know, are still going out in Reaper orders. I meant to check that with Ron today. And I don't have the new scale guide, but I do have these. So Sur 4 scale, if you've been with a Reaper Kickstarter before, was the standard for a long time for gauging the scale of various figures. He, I believe, has been replaced by a fisherman who's kind of doing the, this big thing, and then there's a little scale with actual numbers on it. Particularly for the digital sculpts. I don't know if it works on physical sculpts too. So that's the dwarf. And where the hell halfling go? That's the halfling, who you can see is just a little more than half of his size. So this is the Bones Black material, and I know this is also confusing that there are 3 things. The only things that should be produced in this Kickstarter, in this bendier material, are big things where you're not going to notice it. It makes them a little lighter and sturdier. I think it's also a little less expensive. If you compare, a human from Bones Black line, you go on the Reaper website, the stuff that's available now, to a human from Original Bones, I think these ones are about $1 more expensive than these ones. So for the big stuff, to keep costs down for you and for everybody else, they still use this original material. They shoot it in gray now, though, I think. So they don't do this white anymore because it is hard to photograph and it's hard for you to see that he's not as undetailed as he might look here. Some of it's just the white glares and you can't see it. So everything's in gray now. Bones Black is just referring to material. Then there's also Bones USA, which I do have one of those with me. Bones USA are produced in the USA, and it is a slightly different material again. It is, again, a little stiffer and excellent for holding detail, but I think probably also a little, maybe a little more brittle. I mean, it's still... And here, I don't mind doing this with my painted one either. Which is what I was going to work on today, but we'll see whether I get there or not. So this one will take scraping better. So the one that I was working on, I used an X-Acto knife to scrape most of those mold lines off. Which again, I do not believe are severe. This guy, I did use a knife. There's a little knot feather that's poking up from his head. That's one of those mold artifacts, and you can just see it if I move it right in the light. That I took a little too much of a slice off the top of him. So to paint the figure, I got another one out. Because what this figure is, and I do want to make sure that I highlight this because there is stuff happening other than the Kickstarter. This is Kobzar Soloveitko, which I had a little blister somewhere to show you, but I think there we go. So that's the number. This was sculpted by Jason Wiebe. And this is part of a humanitarian aid effort to the Ukraine. So $7.50 from the sale of each one of these figures goes directly to UNICEF to help children in the Ukraine. And you can see on this one, if I can hold him right, that he's got a little thing at the top of his head. And I bought 6 of these, and they all had that. So that's just a mold artifact. But you just slice it off with the knife. You just want to be maybe a smidge more careful than I was there. Because you can see that the one I'm painting, you cannot see that problem because I was more careful the second time. And I didn't want to scrape as much. And I do prefer an X-Acto, not a... So the scalpel is the best for the paring. If you just cut under the mold line, but I and this is, interestingly, it's a number 11 scalpel blade, just like we typically use a number 11 X-Acto blade in a craft knife. And the main reason I prefer the scalpel is that it takes a lot less time to dull. So Original Bones, that white stuff, I would find that my blade started to dull after about 2 figures, which is not very many. And I'm not too cheap with my supplies, but when I realized that you could go with scalpel blades a lot longer. So I don't know if you can just kind of see that there's a little mold line that goes down from the sleeve across this handle. And that's what I would do. And if you have an actual resin miniature, this is the best way to handle resin miniatures as well. There are people who do this with metal miniatures, scraping. I've never been a scraper for metal miniatures. I've always used those diamond files that you saw. And now I will briefly show you metal miniature. This is a Kickstarter thing. So you've seen this miniature, but I don't, you've just seen it in a little Kickstarter graphic. And that is the Tiefling Dancing Girl, who I believe is in the core set. This is just a piece of lint or something. And she is pretty fabulous. Like, I love the hair. I have a big thing about hair on miniatures. That's one of the people's favorite articles on my blog. There's a video that goes with it that I did for the Reaper channel, which was before we had these cameras, but it's still, I think you can still see what's going on. But wait, I'm not sure why Ron sent me this one, because he'd already sent me this one, which is the mini I keep telling you guys that I've been painting for a while now, and I can't show you, but now I can show you. So I've only done the skin and her stockings. But as soon as I get that little goblin finished, I'm dying to get back to her so I can have fun with her hair and her outfit. Because she's very nicely sculpted and I've been having a lot of fun with her. And this one is metal too. Although this is Bobby Jackson, so these are 3D sculpts, but they did Metal Masters. So I think they do a mix of what they send to China. That part I actually don't even know anymore. I used to be able to tell you how that worked. I'm not sure anymore. And I've been writing down all my colors and stuff, so once I finish, this will be an article that goes up on the blog. But for these metal miniatures, my preferred method of fixing things, and it looks like someone actually fixed some of these mold lines before they sent it to me, which is probably because they were putting it on the show or taking pictures or something. It's not that they don't normally fix things that they send to me. But yeah, as it is a master, the mold lines are very faint. Now, some of you may not be clear on what a master is, so I'll explain. And this still happens, I believe, with the Bones USA and the metal miniatures that are produced. So you have the sculptor make something. Nowadays, a lot of them make it in 3D programs. But back in the day, they used to make it out of putty that's kind of like working with chewing gum. And Bob and Julie, they're often here in chat. I'm not sure they're here today. Wow, Real POTUS went and got an IPVO real quick. I don't know that I told you the model because it doesn't say that anywhere. Somewhere I know the model because of the software. But it is pretty plug and play. I will say that about it. And there's like the funky color thing that some of you have seen. You can change the... Let's see if I do that. Woo! So if you need to, for some reason, your orientation is in one direction for where you need to put the camera, you can switch that. You can swivel the head. It's got some nice features. Anyway, so the sculptor is sending in either a digital file or a physical artifact that there is just one of. So you need more than one to make molds for the factory. Because when they make a mold, and you can probably find a video of this online even, because I think if you go to Reaper, especially if you come to ReaperCon, you want to go on the tour. But even if you're just visiting and you're near Denton, Texas, if you talk to them in advance, particularly John, so I think John at reapermini.com, he will set up a tour for you and they'll explain some of this stuff. I've taken the tour several times because I enjoy it. But they take that original one and they, have a single mold copy of it. So the metal molds are using something like rubber, old rubber tires, something like that. It's not exactly that, but it's something like that. And they smush that original in between it, and it makes an impression on both sides. Sometimes, if the original is a physical artifact, it does get destroyed in the process or damaged. It's rare, but it's like a very high heat vulcanization process that is used. So then they'll make like a few of those, and those are the masters. And then they line those up to make the production molds. So the production mold is like in a ring. And it could be a bunch of different miniatures, but because Reaper has decent sales volume, it'll be a ring of all the same person, usually. And then that's what they use to make the miniatures that they package and send to you. And then when that mold gets old again, they go back and use the masters to make the mold. So I always think it's funny when people talk about destroying the molds. It's like, okay, that's nice, but if you still have the master, you can make more of it. The mold's not the important thing. The master is the important thing. And then for the 3D stuff, they'll make prints like the things I painted and make the master mold off that, I think. Now, when they're making the plastic miniatures, I think it's more a question of making sure that the file is correct. Although I'm not sure. They used to print out miniatures and send them to China, and China would use the actual printed miniatures. But I don't know if that's the way it still goes on because, technology marches on through every one of these. How many years ago was Bones 1? Somebody here knows, I'm sure. And Mad Jean says, the master for the original Fungal Queen came back in like 5 pieces. Rainbow Sculptor definitely didn't cry. Nope, not at all. Yeah, I've seen them. You can see they look cooked. Or where there's like blackened pieces. It's nice when that doesn't happen because the sculptor can go back and modify things. But now that's more easy in digital too. So like if this had been a physical miniature, and they can do this off the master too. If you follow Hassle Free at all, he'll show the process of doing this because he'll often get them done as nude and then take the master and put the clothes on them. So then he can use it as the nude figure and change the outfits and hair and stuff. But so if they wanted to do like a variant of this, they could like slice off the hair and give her a different outfit and use that basic shape to kind of do modifications. Nowadays, again, that's something else with 3D that you can do a lot more easily because you can even change, the basic body posture and stuff. But if you ever spot any miniatures in the Reaper catalog where it's like, well, that looks kind of like this, it probably is kind of like this. And they took the original and scraped some stuff off and added some other stuff and things like that. So that she's in, I think all the things that I have shown you are in the core set. I have one other thing, but I asked Ron and he said I could not show it to you yet. Now it's not painted, so I'll manage expectations there. It's not painted, but I do have something, and it's not a little thing either. But Ron said I can show it to you. So hopefully by next week, I'll be able to show it to you. Valander says, I remember seeing so many GW minis back in the day where the master spun one casting, then sculptor would modify like 3 to 5 new variants just to fill ranks while keeping a uniform look. Yes, for games particularly that do units and stuff, I'm sure that that's even more common than Reaper's occasional doing of it. But it is interesting. So let's see that. So that's that thing. I don't know if anyone has any other kind of general Kickstarter 5 questions. I did want to not gloss over this guy. Go get some of this guy because I think the figure will stay in production for a while, but the part where money goes to UNICEF, there will probably be. It is not Faye. And depending on how many Reaper shows, you may kind of sort of seen it already, which Ron may not even know about. So it wouldn't have been from Ron, and it would have been something that Ron's in, but you may kind of sort of seen it already, kind of in the background or getting waved around. I didn't even bring it over to my desk so I wouldn't be tempted, and I hid it behind some stuff, so you can't, even if you have eagle eyes, you shouldn't be able to spot it on my shelf back there. But next week is only a week away. Erides said, John accidentally leaked a bunch of reveals on the Friday stream. I'm sure it would be okay if you accidentally showed it. John works there, so that's a little different than a contractor. We kind of got to keep our noses clean. But so it is interesting because I've been seeing a lot of people like, well, why aren't we showing more? And there's so if you came in at the end of Bones 5 or Bones 5.5, I think Julia Trent was saying, you got to see everything at once. Reaper has actually shown more right now than they typically would have at this point in time. So they always kind of did the thing where you knew what the next goal was and then the one after that. Actually, while I'm here, let me remember to put another coat of that sealer on her. And they might have a few things that they kind of hinted or showed, but it would really just be the thing you were working on, the stretch goal we were working on, and the next one after that. And that was, successful in maintaining, interest and suspense and getting people to pledge towards that stretch goal to open up something else so they could see what the next thing was. Times may have changed. Like I said, Kickstarter in general some of the things that work and don't work on Kickstarter have changed, and with Bones specifically, or the miniature industry specifically. So, you know, it's a world that evolves. And so they are absolutely being responsive to people's concerns about wanting to see more stuff before they commit and whatnot. And they have modulated their thing. One of the reasons they do it the way they do is they shift stuff around, or they add things, or they remove something and swap in something else. So a lot of it is decided in advance, and there's only so much we can do with suggesting new things. That doesn't mean suggestions will never happen. It just means they might not happen in this Kickstarter. They might come out as like a regular release, or in probably what will be Kickstarter 7. So it's not pointless to make suggestions. It's just, you know, it takes, despite what was said on a recent episode of Crow's Nest where Jason pooped out this little donation miniature in, 28 hours, they don't normally sculpt that way. It's normally a process that's a little longer than that. So if you think of all the things you've seen, and if it takes even 3 days, let's say, and it probably takes, you think of a giant miniature, I'm sure that takes a lot longer than 3 days, and probably even a lot of these, humanoid-sized miniatures take longer than 3 days. And you multiply that just by the number of miniatures you've seen, obviously they've been working on this a lot in advance. So there's only, so much that they can do, but because they have planned for just in case, it's wildly successful, there are things they can swap around. And that's one of the reasons that in the past they have not been super, is this in focus? I'm not sure that it is. So if you look at that place on the leg that I've been fixing, that little circle where you could see where the metal was injected, you can't see that anymore. So that took 3 coats of the, and why is it not focusing? Let's try getting closer and see if that works. There we go. You can't see that anymore. The line is her greaves, or no, Sabaton. That's right. That let her help me out the other day. So that line is the metal front of her boot. What was there was, if you were here at the beginning of the show, when I was using the files and knives and whatnot, there was like a little circle around where there was like, where the plastic had been injected, and then the part around that. And that's all I had to do to cover that up. So this stuff is a miracle cure. Now, Anne has said that the Reaper's Gloss Sealer is actually not as viscous as brush-on sealer. But in most cases, I would say gloss sealer is even thicker. But I would be careful of using this for the same thing. Like if I had a really big problem, I might start with this. But you can add texture. If the solution that you're using to fill stuff in is too viscous, you're going to add texture when you brush, or you're going to be able to see around the edge where you're putting the material. So you have to kind of feather out the edges and stuff. So the brush-on sealer is a little safer of a solution. Yeah, Moonlight Minis has been working on Shimmer Scale for about 2 weeks. So if you think about all the miniatures that you've seen, whether they're, unlocked or not, and then think about how they have unlocked stuff for another 3.5 weeks, the sculptors have been working a while on this. They've been doing a lot of work. And so that doesn't mean that nothing can be added. Stuff was added last time. Stuff was added the time before. It just means that you're more likely to be able to get stuff swapped around or give them ideas for future products than to see everything that everybody says in the comments on this Kickstarter. That has never happened. There's no way that it could happen. So just to manage those expectations a little. So definitely get some of this. And if you actually want to use it to seal miniatures, which if you, maybe Quindy can find it. So I have a post on my blog that's how to paint a miniature that will survive the apocalypse, which is a little bit of exaggeration clickbait. But to me, to make a sturdy paint job, there are 7 steps that are more important than sealer. It's all the stuff I do from this point, this prep point, to the sealer is what really makes this a tough paint job. I do not seal my miniatures. Lie if Ron asks, but I don't seal my miniatures. This is not sealed. I find it changes the paint color just enough that I don't like it. Now, if I'm painting metal miniatures in particular for a game, I do seal those miniatures. If you see my miniature on Reaper Aaron, 100% I seal that miniature. And in fact, I did what I call candy coating, which is first you gloss seal because gloss sealer is more protective. Then you do matte, which is this matte is not strong enough to cover up a strong gloss. I don't think I have so Tester Dull Coat as a spray is a good matte. I don't like to spray bones. I'm pretty sure it's what I used on that metal miniature, but there's something else like AK Interactive's super matte or very matte or something ultra matte. I think is the kind of replacement product I found to use on plastic miniatures. See, Bryce doesn't seal either, and no one ever believes me. they're all like panicky about it being the sealer, but it's way more important to wash this, like just scrub it with soap and water, or what I often do now is dip them in isopropyl alcohol or spray it even, because I have this alcohol spray thing now because of all the germs, so I like spray off my phone or whatever with this now and then. But I started using it on miniatures too. So I also have a little dip. I have like a Tupperware filled with isopropyl alcohol, and I just throw them in there for a minute and then take them out. I think if you leave them in a little while, it will even leach out some of the plasticizer if you want to reduce the bendiness on some of the older ones. But anyway, what you're doing is you're taking off all the finger oil, because I'll tell you right now. So they make this miniature in China, and the machine spits it out into a bin, and then some guy grabs it out of the bin and he puts it in a little plastic bag, or I think they usually make them like 10 to a plastic bag, 10 or 20. So he might have had lunch just now, and he's grabbing a bunch of them and he's putting them in a little plastic bag. Then they get to Reaper, and they use a machine they call the Wheel of Pain. So the Wheel of Pain is remember when I told you that the molds are in a circle? The Wheel of Pain is kind of like that, but did something get... Sorry, I try to be kind to the OCD amongst us. The wheel is kind of like that, but what it is a wheel for these blister packs. So it's like a wood frame that you just load a bunch of these in. Actually, I forgot a step, because after they get made in the molds, the metal ones, so you've got metal ones are made in the mold, and then they're out, and then there's like just a big bin of them, or you've got a big bin of the plastic ones. There's a QC department that looks at them and makes sure they're okay. QC might have just had lunch and got their greasy sandwich all over your miniature. Then it goes to the Wheel of Pain. So they've got like a setup of, 8 or 10 of these blisters. It depends. They've got all different sizes of these because there's different sizes of blisters. And then, so the guy or girl, man in the Wheel of Pain, gets the blisters all set up. Then they just grab handfuls of these miniatures and put them all in. And then a thing comes down and it like heat seals the paperback to it. So that's why you can see there's a little thing around there. It heat seals the blister pack to the paper thing. So there's at least 3 people who might have been eating lunch right before they packaged your miniature. And then when you got excited and you bought it and you took it out of the package, you might have just been eating lunch or something. So chances are it's got finger oils and mold release. Definitely if it's a metal miniature, it has mold release, which is like talcum powder on it, because they powder the molds before they run it so that it'll come out of the mold. So for all of those reasons, I think tip number 1 for making your paint job sturdy is wash the miniature. Because if there's like a little spot of grease there and I paint and maybe the paint seems to stick, but then you get that part that always just seems to rub off and you paint it again and then it rubs off. That may be that there's mold release or grease or something that's on that little spot. Then the second thing is that we think about acrylic paint as drying really fast. And it does. I mean, that stuff. No, that wasn't the one I was fixing. Where's my dwarf lady? So I just put that paint on her. It's dry. It's even dry on my palette, the first little drop that I put out. Except it's not, really. It's touch dry. It doesn't fully cure for at least 24 hours. Depending on your climate, it might be 48 hours. So your paint isn't sturdy until that amount of time has elapsed. and it's more likely to rub off. If you thin your paint a lot, you've reduced the binder, it's more likely to rub off. Now that, I don't think that's going to be as big a thing on miniatures. Now that happened with these, because I used a super thin down glaze to put the red parts on. And right after I did it, I was making mistakes and I was scrubbing them, and I was noticing how easy it came off because I had used just water. You can mix glazes or washes with like half this, half water. They also made kind of a thing in a bottle to do that with, which is called wash medium. You won't have that loss of paint integrity with that. But for whatever, I was in a big rush when I did the last part of the 3 miniatures because I need to get Ron a picture. And it worked in this case because it made it real easy for me to fix mistakes. But I'm pretty sure it'd be solid now because I left that so long. And it's painted on a bunch of other stuff. So it's painted on, you know, paint straight out of the bottle. It's got something to adhere to. But I wouldn't thin down your first few coats that much. I mean, when you see me paint on this channel, I'm pretty much always painting out of the bottle. Reaper paint out of the bottle is base coat consistency, in my opinion, which I have talked about consistency before. Big Apple ST77. Even without having lunch, our fingers, hands have a certain amount of natural oils that can get all over stuff. Yes, and that's why if you've handled your figure at all, which you will have had to do if you're trying to remove the mold lines in the ways that we talked about earlier, you have deposited grease on it. Now, I wash my hands before I paint. I get a lot of dry skin issues in the winter because of that. But that's another reason that my figures are on here, is because then I'm minimizing handling while I'm painting, because that will also help your paint be sturdier, because you're not, you know, if I was putting my fingers all over the loot while I was painting these other places, I may be depositing oils on the loot before I even get to painting it and have that same problem. So giving your primer and your paint time to dry is also, or time to fully cure, is also going to help you have a sturdier paint job. Then I worry about sealer. But I mean, I have miniatures that I take to shows, like, you know, I've had miniatures handled by people at classes and stuff, and the paint is not just coming off just because I've never put the sealer on it. Like I say, if I'm painting a gaming miniature, I will seal it. And gloss, everything is always sturdier than matte anything. So gloss paint is actually sturdier than the paint that we paint with, because the matting agent, for whatever reason, I guess maybe it's diluting the amount of acrylic polymers in there that are binding together. But for whatever reason, and I've confirmed this with Golden as well as with Ann Forrester, who mixes the Reaper paint, glossy stuff and acrylic by nature is at least semi-gloss. The only reason ours is matte is because they stick stuff in it to make it matte. M&M 46, do you let them air dry? If possible, yes. I have in the past used a hairdryer enthusiastically just for the painting process. So I'll have it on here. I'm not going to like handle my miniatures a lot or use them. But this is something else that I've now confirmed both with major acrylic manufacturers and with the Reaper paint mixer. The heat of the air dry can make it dry so fast that the paint underneath doesn't have time to dry. So then it's not as sturdy either, or you can get crackling. Or crazing. Golden calls it crazing. And I have occasionally had that in the past, very rarely. So it kind of looks like cracks, but it doesn't really crack all the way through. And that is caused by the upper skin of the paint drying out quicker than the lower portions. I mean, it's rare, and I've rarely had problems, but I go ahead and use my hairdryer on air now if I want to use a hairdryer. But then after I use the hairdryer, I'm letting the paint, the miniatures sit for days before they're going to get handled, if not longer, because, you know, once I finish painting them, they just sit there until I take them wrong, or I'm showing you guys. So they're not getting handled a lot as wool right after painting. Moonlight Minis, I feel like your color choices have gotten more and more complex. Is that something you've intentionally focused on developing this last couple of years? It probably is. I think, I mean, certainly I went through a whole period where I think oversimplistic color approach was a big problem that my painting had that I didn't realize for a while. I guess I'm not one of these people who gets in a color rut. I'm sort of always trying to mix it up. Hey, Michael Mordor and Raiders. Wow, thanks for joining us. Today I'm talking about some of the Reaper Kickstarter miniatures, and this cutie, who is a charity fundraising miniature for humanitarian aid in Ukraine. So if you buy this figure from Reaper, his name is Kobzar Soloveiko, which I'm sure that I'm mispronouncing. $7.50 of every sale goes to UNICEF to benefit children in the Ukraine. So I was planning on painting him a little more, but we kind of got distracted with showing some. Oh, Michael Mortar was working on one of these. Excellent. So you guys have seen him a lot, but I'm also showing off some of the miniatures that are in the Reaper Kickstarter. So these are the unpainted ones that have been going out to various streamers as well as people in Reaper orders, and they were in the Adepticon swag bags, I believe. And I have painted versions of those. So I will show some of those while we're talking. And I'm just trying to answer sort of general Kickstarter questions. I was talking a bit about the different kinds of plastics that Reaper uses, how to prep miniatures. So we talked a little bit about how to prep the different kinds of plastics, as well as some stuff that would work on metal figures. And then just now, since that sort of naturally led into things you can do to make your paint job sturdier, because I was talking about using brush on sealer as a preparation aid for filling in little divots or rough spots on a miniature. It does, of course, also work as a sealer, but I consider sealer to be kind of the last thing you do to preserve a paint job, not the first thing. There's a whole bunch of things that is more useful to do before that. So this one is broken off, and I just want to emphasize again for people who weren't here, this is not the same material. I have a 3D print master direct from the sculptor's file. This is what shattered because that is a more brittle material. This Bones Black, that is what the product is made in, is a much sturdier material. Now, it is less bendy than the original Bones, but most people consider that a feature because, you know, her hammer shaft isn't going to go all wilty and whatnot. But it does mean that if I worked at it for a bit, I could pop this one off as well. I just would have to work at it a lot harder than I had to with the resin version. And that's been one of the common questions that I've seen in the Kickstarters. How do we know? Thanks for coming by the ball, Jim. How do we know which miniatures are going to be produced in what? So this Bones Classic, which is now also produced in gray. This is an old miniature that I have. It's only used on larger figures now. So things where the weapons aren't so small that they're going to, you know, get shoved out of place in the blister or whatever. Anything that's humanoid sized is going to be either Bones Black or Bones USA. Right now, they can't tell you exactly which I know some people are wondering about, and they'd love to see as many things made in the USA as possible, and I'm sure that Reaper would like to make as many things in the USA as possible. But what we can tell you is that it will be made in one of these two materials that holds detail better and doesn't have droopy, well, not droopy, but weapons that are prone to going askew. So if that's been a concern of yours, when they say they can't tell you exactly what's going to be what, they mean they can't say that after the Kickstarter, this girl is going to be produced in Bones Black, and this one's going to be produced in Bones USA. They don't know that yet. They haven't made those decisions. But they will be produced in something that works with the humanoid figure. So if that's your concern, I hope that concern is addressed. And I didn't show her with. So she's a tall lady, as many dancers are. With the super fun hair. And I have been painting that one. I'm dying to get back to her, actually. Like, it was like I was painting away on her, and then Ron was like, paint these guys. I need them now. And then I had another customer that I'd kind of put off, that I had to work on their stuff, which I cannot show because it is not in yet. So I've been like, I was like really getting in the groove with her. So hopefully I'm going to finish up this little guy, who's the last of the promotional miniatures. And actually, so it's hard to tell on here, I think, but I have already painted the leather and stuff. And this is going to be metal plates. So I just painted over that with a dark material. So it looks like there's all this one color going on, and there's not. The helmet's going to be metal too. I just did the little face things leather. So he's in some ways further along than he looks, and then other ways not as far along as he looks. So I'm just going to double check that I didn't miss any questions or comments. Oh, you meant Eminem had asked about letting things dry. I'm always so impatient with the washing process, and I just wonder if it matters if I let it air dry or towel dry. For the washing, like with soap and water, no, absolutely not. That does not matter. I thought you meant drying paint. So I will often actually use. Where did my candidate? So I consider this like one of my studio necessaries is having this canned air. So if I'm needing to paint something very quickly and I've given it the dip in alcohol or washed it with soap and water, I will begin by spritzing a little with this to blow off as much water as possible. And that helps it dry faster. I also use that to dust off the miniatures, or if you're painting base coats and you paint something textured like this and you're painting really fast, you'll often notice a lot of little bubbles. I'll use the compressed air, but I just press just a little, and that will pop the bubbles as well. You can blow on them a little bit too, but then I start to get a head rush if I do it too much. So yes, what time are we at? I will maybe slap some paint on Kobzar here. Unless there's more, Bones 5 questions or comments. I am trying to figure out if there's a way that I can auction him off or something to also contribute more money to charity once he's finished. So I do kind of want to get him done for that purpose. As much as I also want to paint, Bones 5 things and help Reaper and build the excitement and the hype and whatnot. If anyone came a little later and you were hoping for more Bones 5 news than you are getting here, stick around. In another hour, they're going to start the first of the afternoon. Here's what's up with Bones chats. I mean, I guess Friday was sort of that, but Reaperland always happens. So Reaperland was the show that John and usually Dave host, and that always happens on Friday afternoons. It's just this Friday. Oh, did I say Bones 5? I probably did, because Bones 5 was like dominating my life for a very long time. Bones 6 is the one that's happening now. I'm not like Ron. I guess I am like Ron. Ron's still in Bones 4. But they will have more news for you on what is technically the first of the afternoon shows. Because Reaperland happens every Friday, so you should come even when it's not Bones Kickstarter times. Big Apple ST77. There's something satisfying about the bird with a brush playing a bird. I know, I thought that was kind of fun too. So I want to paint, I was going to start on the loot, but since these things are kind of underneath, I think that I will start with those things. And let's see. I had thought, so I was thinking about doing like a light tan leather and then a dark blue leather, and I'm just trying to decide to make what thing. I think that I want to be the light tan. I feel like the belt should be the blue. So I'll do the little satchel pouch. It's very interesting. I feel like there's like little secret things in there. Little secret bard things are in there. And the scabbard. And then Moonlight Minis had asked me about color stuff. And I don't know if it's probably just doing more 2D stuff has maybe helped me improve my color complexity. Because certainly like it was a thing that I'd worked on in the past, but I don't know if it's a thing that I've been going nuts on lately. So since there's a lot of orange in his outfit, which I'm taking this from if you look up Ukrainian Nightingale, there is a bird that has the bright blue throat. There's some white stripes, and then the color that I painted on his jerkin is another stripe that's on the bird's chest. But since this is a personified bird and he's wearing clothing, you can't see it. So I decided to take that color element and use it on his clothing to work it in. Let's see, Eminem 46 Bones 5 is what got me hooked. Yeah, it's so if this is only your first or second experience and you came in later in Bones 5, it's not weird what they're doing. You got to see a lot of stuff if you came in later in Bones 5 because you came in later. All that stuff had already been unlocked. The beginning of Bones 5, you actually saw less than what we're seeing right now. They have responded to the many requests for more information on what there's going to be a lot more openly they have in the past. T. Pugmire, do I have any insight into color choices for the paint sets for the Kickstarter? This one, yes. This one I had quite a bit of insight. So on the last one, there was a learn to paint kit, and I picked all the colors for that. Now, the guideline was, a green, a blue, a red, a yellow. Like, there was definitely this stuff has to be in it thing, but which greens and reds and yellows and blues was left to my discretion. But if you're familiar with the Reaper channel offerings and you've watched her regularly, Ann Forrester paints, I think she starts 11:30 a.m. Central, Monday through Fridays. Apparently she had a late plane, so she wasn't able to join us today. But she is usually on Monday through Fridays. She, for many years, was the paint guru at Reaper. So she designed and mixed all the paints. And so she would pick here's the 12 returning color, not 12 existing colors. So there's usually, for every paint set, but I want to say one, for every Kickstarter, except one. I think there's been here's 12 existing colors, and here are 12 new colors. And she would pick those. Now, I have sort of become the keeper of the Lost Paint Chronicles. So if there's a color that got canceled that people are very sad about, I tend to make a list and keep those around. Or if there's something people are like, gee, I sure wish the Reaper line had this, I might also note that down. So there would be times when Anne was like, hey, if you have any information on colors, feel free to share it at this time. But she made the choices about what ultimately was picked. And that was just for new stuff. So I tended to not have any input or knowledge into here's the existing colors that we're packaging up into a set. But Anne now is kind of like me. She does contract painting for Reaper. She does her show, but she's a freelancer, and she's not at the Reaper facility making the paint and stuff anymore. So this one, several of the artists, that's why it's called Painter's Picks, because a number of the artists were consulted about what paints we thought would make a nice set for the 12 existing paints. And then we also made suggestions in fact, I made more suggestions. I think I suggested 18 or 20 paints that could be added. And then Ron and the paint department narrowed that down to the 12. So there are 12 new paints coming. You just don't know what they are yet. And I do know what they are. Moonlight Minis. That sounds like a great mini. The Keeper of the Lost Paint Chronicles. Eric Johnson. I missed Bones 1, but then I backed everything since then, even Base Boss. Of course, I haven't actually started painting any of the Bones Kickstarters yet. Well, my husband, who is an enabler, I guess, likes to tell me that painting miniatures and collecting miniatures are two separate hobbies. So he could stop me from buying stuff, and then he says stuff like that, which does not stop me from buying stuff. So I'm just fixing up some of the lining. And I am actually using black because I don't know where my wee liner got to. I think it's probably with I put the paints that I was painting the Goblin with aside, and I think I forgot to pull blue liner out that I was using on this guy. So hopefully it's not going to become a thing, but if it becomes a thing, I will set the camera for a minute so you don't have to see me walking around and go grab it because it's not very far away. And then as of now, you get to see me do the erasing in person. So I often do just use a regular brush, but I have a brush that I cut down, which I don't seem to have with me today. to use as an eraser brush. Because when I was talking about, how it takes acrylic paint a minute to cure, sometimes this works in our favor, because I've even had times where I got a little, maybe I'm painting this belt and I don't realize that I just got a little spot of paint on his face or something. If I catch it within 5 or 10 minutes, I've been able to scrub it off. And you can make that easier if you have an old brush and you cut it down so the bristles are very short, which I have one of. I've shown you guys my eraser brush before, but I know we have new people here. Here it is. And I made this years ago. So this used to be like a slanted flat brush. And now it's my eraser brush. Because the bristles are shorter, they don't have as much give and they work better to scrub, but they're not really harsh bristles. Like if you got a bristle brush, there are brushes that they make for watercolor painters to use for scrubbing, and those would be way too harsh on a miniature. You would rub down to the primer. And you don't want to do that. I mean, you probably rub down past the primer. Now, this is a plastic miniature, so I have not primed it. If you've ever read the Bones FAQ on the Reaper forums, or you got sent, there were like, with at least one of the Kickstarter, hey Pistol Cats, thank you. At least one of the Kickstarters, they sent out kind of a information about Bones note. And that note came from tests that I did and things that I wrote about on the Reaper forums. And you can go see the pictures that, like, one of the tests involved me putting in a bunch of miniatures in a box in my dryer to simulate heavy scraping, heavy damage of contact of miniatures to miniatures. And I think I put wooden bases and plastic bases in there with them. So I tested various paints. I tested primer versus not primer. I tested spray primer versus other things. So this is why I recommend not using spray products, aerosol spray products like spray primers or sealers on the Bones material, because I noticed that it was, is he staying in focus? He is not. That you would get stickiness. It's like sometimes the primer just doesn't cure. I think it's worse in humid environments, because you'll get people who come on and they're like, well, I use this and it works great for me. And it's like, okay, but you may live in a completely different climate than this other person who said they had problems or is asking whether, what spray primer they can use. So my answer is just no spray. No spray products other than shooting stuff through an airbrush, because it's the propellants. It's not the fact that it's applied via the air that creates the problem. So, and even if you're someone who likes to start, particularly if you have some of these still, but you don't want to paint over flat white, you like painting over black, or I like painting over gray. So it worked out great for me when they changed these, because you can see that this is a metal miniature, and look, she's gray. You just use a coat of paint as your primer if you're doing it for color. But that is one of those things that I have firm opinions about. I no longer engage in threads on Facebook or Discord or wherever about spray products on Bones, because I said my piece. I provided my evidence because I took photographs and documented my experiments. Because that's, if you're new here, that's the kind of thing I like to do on Beyond the Kit, is we'll experiment with different things sometimes and test different products and see how things work. I have a series from a few months ago where I was testing different brushes for dry brushing. So I got the same miniature and like 6 or 7 different kinds of brushes. And I used the same paint colors in the same miniature and the same process, but studied how did the marks look different if I used this or that. Okay, he's got some other gizmo under there, and that is just going to be black, because if anyone turns him over and looks under his loot, well, they deserve what they get, which is going to be black. And this is the same kind of thing I would do with fills. And in fact, he does have a fill. If you look under here, and maybe Moonlight Minis can tell me if I'm using the wrong word, but there, if this was a real bird person who was playing a lute, there would be a space there between his stomach, his arm, and the lute. And likewise, up here at the top, there would be a space between his stomach, his arm, and the lute. But the way miniatures are manufactured, you can't have like indented open spaces like that. They call it overhangs, or another thing you can't have. So they have to put filling. They have to put the material in so that it gets cast that way. And the best solution to those is to paint it black or blue liner. And it's such a dark, dull color that people's eyes will skip over it and not typically think about the fact that, oh, there's a piece of plastic there that shouldn't be there. See, I just did get a big gloop of paint on a finished part. But I'm not going to panic. And even when I painted his eye, I realized later, I'm not sure, like he's got a little, if you look at a real bird, there's like a rim around their eye. So I think it's part of that, and I just painted the eyes black a little bit last time, so he didn't look all creepy and staring. So I haven't really finished the eyes. I'll put a little reflection light in there at the very least, but I'll go look at what the real bird's eye looks like before I do that. Thank you. Okay. Pixel Cats, art and science combined. I love seeing analysis like that. Yep, I try to be the analytical one. Adam the DM, I stopped using spray primer or sealer because of some catastrophes. Thankfully, my airbrush now does an amazing job. Imagine Rainbow is sculpting and asked me to type for her. It's called Gap Fill, and she uses it even in her models intended to be 3D printed. It adds stability to the model and allows you control the color in spaces that otherwise you're at the mercy of the table. Yeah, and I have seen that sometimes. You'll get a place where there's like a, someone's arm is like this and there's like a gap. And then you're taking pictures and there'll just be places where it looks weird because of the angle. And so sometimes it is better just to fill things in. But sometimes they have to fill things in to make it work with the miniature making process. And there are lots of things that happen. Like sometimes people are like, oh, everything has such a big chunky weapon. Sometimes that's a stylistic choice, but there's kind of like a minimum width that a weapon or something like that. Ankles are another thing. I mean, if you really compared this to an actual person, the ankles are probably a lot thicker than an actual person's would be. Because if you make them as thin as they're supposed to be, they would just break off their feet. And that would not be fun for any of us. So there's a lot of these technical things, and I barely know about this. Like I know a little bit about this because I'm like in the room when they're explaining some things to the sculptors when they change processes, or the sculptors are saying no, it has to be like this. But I'm not actually a sculptor, and I'm not. Despite what I just said about the experiments, I guess in some ways I'm a technical person, but other ways I am not. I don't know. So I just know a little bit about that stuff from overhearing things, but there is a lot more thought and process put into that than you might realize if you are like me and you're not a technical person. I didn't say what color I was using. This is brown sand for these accent browns, and I'm going to do the same thing on the lute, which I think I'm going to paint like a really dark stained wood so that the sunflower pops. Since there's orange on the outfit and in some of the areas of the bird, I wanted a less interesting, in some ways, brown, so that it stands out as distinct. And these are areas that are not kind of like this tiny belt pouch is not the main story of this figure. So it should not be in a color that like really stands out. Like if I painted it the same bright blue as the feathers under his throat, you would turn it to the side and you'd just be looking at that part way too much. Oh, Moonlight Minis thinks I know plenty. Well, When they talk about the physical stuff, I understand. Then they start talking about 3D programming, and it literally seems like they're talking another language to me. They start using all these technical terms, the different kinds of brushes and commands and features and stuff, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It was a major achievement for me to learn the Procreate program on my iPad, which now that I know how to use it is a delightful and intuitive program. And I don't know about intuitive, but it's a delightful program for making art on a tablet. And if you have an iPad, it only costs like $10, so I thoroughly recommend it. It is definitely the most reasonably priced, heavily featured art program that I've ever seen. Because stuff like Photoshop, they want monthly fees, which I guess if you're a very productive person is reasonable. But I'm not a very productive person, so I would rather kind of just pay one fee or pay as I use something. And they're constantly updating Procreate too, despite this very reasonable pricing. Like they added animation, I think, in the last one. Or improved the animation features a lot. I guess would be more accurate. I wish I had some idea what this was. It's probably like a specialized type of pouch thing that I don't know. But yes, so I can't share pictures of this bird because I did not find... I have some sites that I go to when I'm looking for pictures to share on stream. And they did not have the Ukrainian... Actually, honestly, I didn't even look because I'm just going to assume that they didn't have the Ukrainian Nightingale. But if you type Ukrainian Nightingale into Google and hit the images tab, you should see some pictures of the bird that I'm very clearly using for inspiration. So this is leather. It would get beat up. I'm not being like too persnickety about making it super smooth because it wouldn't necessarily be super smooth. Like I'm not sure it shows on this guy, but I was trying to add a lot of texture on his leather because he definitely doesn't take care of his crap because he's a goblin. He's got raiding and general craziness to do, not polishing his pouches. That sounds like a euphemism for something, but I meant it literally. And then the lighter color that I'm using is leather brown. So I'm using some of the colors out of the Reaper Learn to Paint kits because that I figured if I called this Beyond the Kit that I should kind of incorporate some of those colors and some of the stuff from the kit. That's why there was a series where I looked at dry brushing, and I actually still have one more show that I wanted. One more material that I wanted to test dry brushes on. So we did 2 types of clothes and a stone wall. But I also had the docks from the Brinewind thing in Bones 5 and 5.5. Well, actually, I don't know if that one's in 5.5 or not. And I wanted to test all those brushes on that texture because it was kind of a different... It was a finer texture than the stone. And I've just now realized that... I don't know if you guys do this, and tell me if you do this. Thank you, Kariniko. So I intended to paint the belt, the scabbard, and this little satchel thing in these tan colors. And you may have noticed, or you may not have noticed, but I completely forgot the belt. So I'm going to go back and do a little bit on the belt. But I certainly do this all the time when I'm painting, which is one reason I write down my colors. I often do it to share with everyone else now, but the habit started because I would do stuff like, oh, I didn't paint the back of the left arm on this or whatever. And not notice until I was like taking pictures or something else.
So if you do that, don't feel bad. You are not alone. Now, this is a color tip that I will give out to people. You may think, okay, this bird and many fantasy figures are from, a non-industrial society where objects would have a lot of variation, let's say. Because, presumably a different person at a different time tanned his belt pouch compared to the satchel compared to the scabbard or whatever. And this may be true, but in terms of making something eye-catching and or pleasant to look at, you do want to have some variety in the colors in some ways, but you also want to have unity, which I know seems like contradictory, but it's kind of not. So when you repeat colors or use variations of colors that you're already using, it's going to look better than me trying to use 47 kinds of brown on this guy. Which is something that, when we're judging the paint contest at Reaper, or I've judged a little bit at some other contests as well. It's something that sometimes comes up with novice painters, and I see how you get there. Because if you're thinking about it logically, that does seem logical. But what's unifying things a little more than you might think about is the light. So the light that we see people and objects in affects how the colors look. So that unity isn't as unrealistic or wacky as it may seem, because the light color is drawing things closer together in colors. Also, I would say just go look at the covers of some of your favorite fantasy novels or whatever, and I bet you will see the artist not making every single little piece of leather a different brown, because this is something that we steal from 2D artists who know all kinds of this stuff. And then sometimes if you do need another brown, I will often mix a brown from the colors that I already used on the figure instead of going to get another brown. But I definitely understand if that seems like more of a thing than you want to deal with for tabletop or as a novice painter, because I'm not going to say that I always use mixed colors, because that's not true. That is not true at all. That is something I've become more comfortable with from doing traditional art, where there's a lot more color mixing than there is here. In some arts, I've seen people getting kind of, I don't know, snobby about how we should just be using artist colors and mixing and stuff. And it's like, okay, sure, but there are also colored penciled artists or alcohol marker artists or pastel artists, and they want to have hundreds of different colors just like miniature painters do. So it's not like there's only one way of doing things. And there, I messed my lining up a little, but that is okay. I will fix it. Hopefully staying in focus. If you were here last week, you know all about how I tried changing the positioning a little on the camera so that it was, you could see more, you guys could see more detail, but also so that I could hold the miniature in a position that's a little more natural to me, so that I can hopefully, you get to see me paint a little more like I really paint, and also I won't be horrified after the stream and I look at things. Because that happens sometimes. You're like, it's so awful. Because I was painting, with the miniature held much further away from my eyes. I actually have like two levels of these magnifiers. Now, I am very old. Let us first say that. I am past the age where your eyes start to go and you need bifocals, because I'm wearing bifocals. So if you are a younger person, you may not need to use magnification for everything, but if you are having trouble with stuff like eyes and painting details and you haven't tried painting with magnification, I do recommend it. Daka Flocka Flame. The idea of mixing the colors each time when you're adding to a uniformed army over years doesn't sound very appealing. No, it does not. And if I were painting an army and for some reason there was a color that I just had to have that was a mix, I would mix a bottle of it so that I could just use it with each new figure that I was painting from the army. And in fact, I have done that. I mix my colors up a little more than I used to for non-metallic gold. Like the color that I painted the trim is a little different than I typically used to use as my recipe, because I think you need to customize to the figure a little when you are doing kind of unique color schemes. But I mixed up custom bottles of some of the mixes in between just to save time. Speaking of the trim, for anyone who was here last week, I did not paint the trim on stream. Those are very finely sculpted sunflower details, and I wanted to get that done when I was sure that I was seeing everything okay, since I would like to try to raffle this guy off or auction him off or something. For their charitable donations, I wanted him to look as nice as I could. So I did do that part when no one was watching. But that is the only thing. I think I painted, I checked the eye placement, and I think that's the only thing. That paint might have done a little more lining, because lining is boring. You got to do it, and I'm always going to tell you to do it, even if you're someone who doesn't think it's realistic, and that's a whole other can of worms we'll get into another day. But you don't always have to watch me do it, because that's not exactly exciting. All right. I'm not entirely happy with the scabbard, but I can come back and address that later. I think I will switch over to the dark blue stuff. Yeah, I think I have time to work on some dark blue stuff. So the blues that I had painted on his thing, and now I actually am gonna have to go find my blue liner now that I think about it. So I'll set these up on camera and just switch my view so you guys don't have to watch me walking around, so you can enjoy the Kickstarter figures again. And I can discover that maybe my blue liner is not where I thought it was. Alright, maybe I fake it. Well, this is worrying, because now what did I do with it? Nope, going the wrong way. Alright, well, I'll just fake it. But these are the blues that I used on the throat of the bird. So this one is a Pathfinder color, Andoran blue. The shadow was Hobgoblin blue, and then Frost blue was my lightest color. So I'm probably not going up to the Frost blue, or at least not straight frost blue on dark blue leather, but I'm going to incorporate some of these same colors, but with black. Oh, wow, okay. I haven't done that in a while. I just lost the tip of the bottle, but I can look for that later and just get paint out with the paintbrush. This is not a typical thing that happens to Reaper bottles. So I'm going to get plenty of that out, just so I don't have to do it later. And then put that way off to the side. What bird am I using colors from? Evil Halfling asks. So if you do a Google search for Hungarian Nightingale, you should be able to find, it's the male of the species, because I think as with most birds, we discovered last week that the female is more blandly colored. But it's got these kind of like tans and grays in the main plumage, but with little hints of the warmer rusty browns, Then it's got bright blue neck. There's some white stripes in there too. And then this color is on the chest of the bird. But since the chest is covered up in the sculpt, I incorporated it into the clothing instead. It's got a bright yellow beak, which is also a nice feature. It will play off the sunflower and the trim. And then I think the legs and feet are gray. But I'm going to have to double check that before I get there. I have heard people saying that they want to use Bluebird to paint him as well. Kiriniko points out that it is also known as a blue throat, which is a sensible name, unlike some bird names, because don't you kind of wonder about bird people sometimes when you hear the names of birds? You're like, what? There are some really weird bird names out there. There are some names where you're like, do you even like birds? Like, why are you studying and naming them? You don't seem to be very kind to the birds. So blue throat is a much less terrible name than many birds have been stuck with. So just to check, has anyone, like, I don't know how many people we have that might have come in fairly recently. If you're not sure what this figure is, if you're here because you're looking for Kickstarter information, if you have questions, pop them in the chat. I did show a few Kickstarter figures that I've worked on, and I will try to show those again right as we're ending up. If you're here hoping for the afternoon Kickstarter updates that Reaper was talking about on Reaper Live, that will be beginning in like 25 minutes. So stick around, or, go get a drink and then come back, because you're going to be getting some excellent Kickstarter updates. I'm not like at Reaper facility, and I'm not an official Reaper person, but I've been doing contract painting for them and purchasing their products and being involved in their Kickstarter since before the first one. So I can try to answer kind of general, how does Kickstarter work? How do Reaper Kickstarters work? Questions. I don't have, there's like one figure I have that you guys haven't seen, and I checked with Ron, and I'm not allowed to show it to you. Other than, as I was hinting, you maybe have kind of seen it. There are, like, and I mean on a stream, but not from Ron, or a stream that Ron was in. Evil Halfling picked up 2 and we're doing a mated pair. Oh, that's awesome. Hasn't decided the species. Pixel Cats has one on the way, just waiting for shipment. It also asks, I'm curious if you have any advice on removing mold lines on the new Bones material. I felt pretty confident with the older materials, but this has been trickier. You mean the Bones USA? I was talking about that a bit earlier in the episode. I will briefly demonstrate. So like resin, if you've ever had a resin miniature, it's a bit of a harder material, and I do like scraping. Just trying to find where mold lines are. There's a little bit of one on the head here. So this, I tend to use an X-Acto blade number 11 for scraping. I'm just telling you what I do. I'm not telling you to use sharp objects. So I find scraping works well with these. Scraping does not work as well with Bones Black, and it does not work at all with original Bones. The materials are too pliant, I guess. But you can also use the same technique that you would use on Bones with the slicing. So there's a little, I noticed this one, and I don't think I noticed this on the pouch of the other one. There's like a little weird thing on the pouch. So I like to use a pairing motion very carefully. Again, I'm not suggesting anyone do this, since I'm telling myself to cut towards myself. Maybe that's not the best move. But I would do the same thing with the mold line. So when I prepped, it was a bit of a mix. I did some pairing and I did some scraping. I also would feel fine using diamond files, which I had one up before. So on all the Bones materials, I'm fine with a fine grit diamond file, or this is known as a sanding needle. It comes in white too, which I think is a different grit, but I don't believe I've noticed a significant difference between them. It may be made by Squadron, but I might be misremembering. And the thing with the plastics is you want to use these with a very light hand compared like metal. I would just grind away on metal like that. But on the plastics, and I'm often just going in one direction, and then if there's little hangy bits, I get them off by going even more softly in the other direction. And by soft, I mean I'm doing this and you're not even really seeing it damage my fingernail. Or, because I know Quindy likes when I say this, you should be able to do it on a baby's skin and not upset the baby. Like, don't do it on a baby's skin. This is a metaphor. But think of it that way. Because really, if there's a topic I cannot advise you on, it would be babies. This is not an area of expertise for me. They're tiny little aliens that I don't understand. Now, this is one of those areas where I was saying how I forget to paint things. So I have to remember that the strap goes up here and crosses the body. So this part is also going to need to be the blue. Because that is the kind of thing I would forget. Now, I will say every great once in a while, I have found a miniature where a sculptor has forgotten. or it's gone a little weird. You're like, wait a minute, I'm following. Where did it go? But this is very rare. And I'm sure even more rare now that so many people are doing things digitally. Because I suspect the process is different enough that you are less likely to do that. See, I'm just messing up all over the place today. But acrylic paint is, like, if I can't wipe that off, that's okay. I can paint over it. It's not a big stress thing. Okay, what am I missing here? My favorite bird names include Tiny Sky Tyrant, Horn Screamer, Hoary Puffleg, and Monotonous Lark. Yeah, Monotonous Lark, that one cracked me up. It was like, what? How much did this bird annoy you that you're calling him Monotonous Lark? There are better ones, but they are probably not suitable for chat. Yeah, there are bird names that seem really rude. Trash Ram, I'll be right back. Rhonda Bender told me to use files on baby skin. What kind of diamond file? Are there different kinds of diamond files? I was unaware of this. So when searching for files online, what I found was most helpful was... Where did my file even go? To look for 2mm diameter files. So this is the 2mm part, but that tended to get me the correct size of this. So I have a set of these. It's from a store called Rio Grande. They're a jewelry supply company. Reaper used to get these ordered into their store. So I actually, my backup set is probably still 15 years old. Because when I realized that I liked these, I bought another package like this. Now, I actually only use 3 of them, which is, maybe I'd use that one. But I've never ended up using, there's triangles. And I don't know, that one looks like a sword blade, and that's a diamond. I don't use any of that. But they came in the set, and I looked up this company. They're now online. You used to have to, pay for their catalog, and then they would take the money off the first order and stuff, which is why I would just buy them off the Reaper store. Not the online store, the in-person store. So a half round is a very common file shape. Definitely useful. You should have one of those. An actual round, also useful. But one that's slightly less common, still pretty common, but slightly less common. This is called crossing. So it's kind of like you had 2 of these, 2 half rounds, and then smush them. And it's got a little bit of a fine edge. You can get that into, in between fingers, sometimes between locks of hair. You can get some of those mold lines that are in super annoying places with those. A baby bird, he's doubly proficient. Hey, Robbie Jim. So if anyone's showing up here hoping for Bones News, that will be starting at 4 p.m. Central, which is very soon, but just not quite yet. And I am working on painting Kobzar Solovenko, the fundraising Nightingale figure that Jason Weeby sculpted and Reaper put out. And $7.50 from each sale of this go to UNICEF humanitarian aid in the Ukraine. And I'm painting him like a Ukrainian nightingale. So we were just talking about weird bird names. If you're in the chat and you're like, monotonous, what now? That was one of the weird bird names. But I will also try to finish this up quickly enough that I can show the Bone 6 stuff that I do have, which is not very much. But I do have a few bibs and bobs, and I'm happy to try to answer general Kickstarter type questions. So I don't have any insight into, what's in this set or whatever. I have one figure that I'm not able to show you now, but that's it. That's the only secret intel I have. It's not totally secret. Ron just may not have noticed that it's not totally secret. But I am respecting his wishes, and I won't show it until it has been unlocked, which hopefully will be by next week. So I don't have any of that kind of information, but I've been here for every Reaper Kickstarter. So I do have general, here's how Kickstarter works, here's how Reaper Kickstarter works information. Is it one that was shown on another stream? It has been shown on another stream, but not a stream that Ron was in. At least I don't think a stream that Ron was in. It hasn't been shown on another stream. It's like been there, but not openly spoken of. So if you're a regular watcher, that may be enough clues. If it was on my stream, I swear I would have gotten permission for it. I don't think it was your stream. It's aired on the Reaper channel. Who do we know that's an agent of chaos that is occasionally on Reaper channels that Ron wouldn't have been there to see? Who do we know? You might be on the right track. Like I say, agent of chaos, and you go straight there. Evil Halfling, you're welcome. I will try to do a show that's like just on prep at some point. I'd thought about it, and then I guess I got distracted and hadn't done that. As with the other leather items, I'm not trying to be super smooth and pristine. The adventure party that I was showing earlier, and I will try to show again in a minute, I was painting them with a definite sort of aesthetic. So they are super smooth. Some people have said kind of cartoony, but there are people who actually do cell shading and hatch mark shaded figures now. So I don't know that I want to call it cartoony just because I think that minimizes their efforts in a way, the people who are really doing true comic and cartoon stuff. But it is a very stylized approach because they gave me an old school vibe, and that was kind of the style that was in vogue when I first started painting. I mean, not Ron old school, I guess. We're not going back to 1986, but we are going back to like 2003 or something. Which doesn't seem old, and yet some of you are going to be like, oh, I wasn't even born then or whatever. So I heard Agent of Chaos. Is there something I can help with? Quindy Lou, 10-minute warning. Imagine cartooning has such a bad rap. Yeah, I did. It's weird because some of the people were complimentary, other people were kind of like, "Well, isn't that a bit cartoony?" It's like, well, yes, I guess it is. It actually took me longer to paint than it would doing these little, oh, this leather doesn't have to be really smooth deal. I mean, there were times when I was like, why did I decide I wanted to be super smooth and make my life a living hell? Yeah, that was a great choice. But that's just how those figures struck me. They kind of had a vibe to me a bit like computer game as well, like the early days when you know you look good at the beginning of a computer game, like a computer role playing game, but you don't have super cool stuff yet. Okay, you look good in most of them. There are some, like when I was playing the most recent Diablo, I had kind of a thrift store look for a while there. But a lot of games, especially like the Japanese ones and stuff, your character will look super cool. Your gear's just crap in terms of stats or whatever. So they struck me as like lower level, starting out kind of guys. Maybe not first level, but lower level. So that was sort of the other reason that I went with the super smooth type look, because I got that computer game vibe from them. Edges and things that rub are the kind of places on leather that are really gonna show the most marks. That's where I'm trying to concentrate the highlighting, but then also pay attention to the shape of objects. So there has to be some highlighting for the shape of an object, and then some highlighting sort of for the wear of an object is the tricky part with more textured stuff. And then even though I use kind of the same colors, it comes out looking a little bit different because I think I painted the neck where I was starting with a lighter color and then putting in some shadows, and here I started with the darkest color and worked up, as well as going darker than I had gone on the neck, because I wanted to have some colors in common, but I don't want this to be as vibrant. And if I end up thinking this is too vibrant, I have ways to knock it down. Glaze it over with something, knock it down. All right, I'm gonna put this guy down. We'll do a little Kickstarter wrap up before you get to go see way more Kickstarter stuff than I can show you. Purple Panda Bear 81. I hope my shading, especially on leather and wood items, one day looks even a fraction as good as yours does. Well, you can get pretty nice shading on leather objects with washes and stuff as well. And just keep practicing, and it will. So I'm gonna get my better. Okay, that side is not better. I think a cat just barged open the door. So if you hear any weird noises, it is a cat eating some crunchy food. All right. Zoom out a little. So this is one that I hadn't been able to show people on the stream until today. So I've been working on her. She is, I'm pretty sure, in the core set. It's a Tiefling Dancer. I play a tiefling in the role-playing game that we play on this channel every other Friday night. So I was like, heck yeah, I want to paint a tiefling dancer. Plus, I love painting hair. So. But I can also show you what she looks like unpainted, because Ron, for reasons unknown, sent me a second one sometime after that. And I actually started painting her ages ago. And then there were other projects that came up that I needed to work on first. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to her, because she's I agree with Moonlight Minnie. She's a very pretty miniature. And I was having a lot of fun painting her, and I want to get to that hair. I mean, I'm excited about the clothes too, but I have to paint the clothes before I can paint the hair, and then I have to paint a lot of tiny jewelry. Well, actually, tiny jewelry might come before those other things now that I'm seeing where it is. Because this is the question I get most often from people, especially newer painters, is what order to paint things. So I like to talk about my thought process for that, because people ask. So this Goblin is also in the core set, and he's been going out as a promotional figure.
So there were 5 different promotional figures. I'm going to show you the other 4 as well. And Ron thought he had sent me all of them, and he had not sent me this guy. So this one is actually the same material that this Bones Black. It's the same material that if you've been getting some of these, if you've been placing orders on the Reaper site, you might have been getting them. They were in the swag bags at Adepticon. This guy is the same material as what you're getting, which is Bones Black. And Bones Black and Bones USA are the 2 materials that will likely be used on all of the humanish size figures. So there's through 4 scale. I don't have the new scale guy, but there's the original scale guy against the Goblin. Oops, now he's stuck to the Goblin's thing. But the other figures that I painted, that are the promotional figures, the ones I painted are 3D prints, and that's going to be relevant in a minute. Because one of mine is broken, but that's because it's a 3D print. Not, you should not worry about that happening with yours. So this is one of the ones that's been going out to people. This is the production material, the Bones Black. You can see the difference on the base, because this one says made in China, and this one says nothing because it was made on a 3D printer. So that's the wizard. Actually, I'm going to keep them here. This is the thief from that group. If you're interested in any of the colors that I used to paint these, I've been posting them on that website that's up at the top of the page. And then Pixelcast just pointed out the OSL, and I will be finishing up in a week or so with an article that talks about OSL. So I already have one article up about OSL from a Christmas miniature a few years ago that had a candle. But there's some kind of different questions that came up with this OSL because it had to have OSL, but the figures also had to work looking at them separately like this because they weren't all coming, they were designed to work as a group, which I'm going to show in a minute for people who haven't seen that, but also as individuals. So like this guy is standing in front of a light source, so his face would be much more heavily shadowed if I'd been emphasizing the light effect. So I kind of was walking a middle ground with making sure that I painted everything so that you could see all the details and stuff and evoking that light effect. So this one is the broken one. Again, because 3D printed material is brittle. It's like if you've ever worked with actual resin miniatures, it's like that. It came to me broken. My various attempts to glue it on have had limited success because I have a glue curse, not because it's impossible to glue things. But your copy is made of this material, which, I mean, I could break that off if I worked at it for a while, but it is much more sturdy. I will not be doing that with the 3D prints. And that's not because of the paint. That's because of the print. I would not have qualms about doing that with my paint. Here, I'll show you. Don't mind doing that on Bones miniatures at all. Even ones that people are paying me to paint. So then the fun thing about these is if you have them all, which now you can do because of the Kickstarter, the bases line up so that you can look at them as a group. No, hold on, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. This is not as difficult a puzzle as I am making it out to be. He slides in there, and it was very carefully designed and posed so that nothing is actually touching anyone else, but they're very clearly going down the corridor in standard marching order. I had someone say that's unrealistic and no one is ever this organized in a role-playing game, and I'm like, no, our standard marching order works great until we actually encounter something. Then that's where everything goes to crap. So those are the goodies that I have currently. Maybe I'll be able to get some more stuff in future weeks. I don't know. I'll have to find out. Trash asks, when you paint spheroids like the wizard there, when you were painting effects like the star, do you always paint in 2 planes of perspective, front and back there? It would depend a bit on the sculpt. What you want to think about is kind of your prime viewing angles. Proctor calls it the money shot. So if someone is going to pick this miniature up and look at it, what positions are they most likely to look in? And on this miniature, it is pretty much planes. She's a little more in the round, so I might use a different thought process. Generally, I want to pick angles where I can't see too much of what I did on the other side from where I'm painting it, I guess is how I would put that. But it's the same thing with non-metallic metal. You kind of have to accept that maybe it's not going to look amazing from, maybe this doesn't look amazing from the side. So I'm kind of picking, here's an angle, here's an angle, here's an angle, and making sure it looks good from those angles. Well, thank you, Pixelcat. I like a very particular kind of non-metallic metal, and I don't even know if it's necessarily the most realistic one. I like a very smooth look, but that's kind of where a comic booky, more textured look. You can get some really interesting stuff with that too. That's very realistic. Anyway, I think it's time to. Is the wizard painted with a new technique that I haven't showed us yet? Nope, just layering. Just layering forever, and then glazes for the green. Which I don't know if I've shown you guys glazes, but I think I have. They're just really thin washes, but you get the excess paint off your brush. But I'm going to turn you over to Reaper Central, that I'm sure has lots of cool Kickstarter updates for all of it. I guess I'm going to go watch too, so that I know what's happening. And I'll see you here next week, hopefully for more Kickstarter related stuff. I meant to tell you about the paints that came out this month, but I'll tell you about that next week. So see you then. Thanks for coming. Oh, where's my